Mr. Speaker, an Open Data Act is important, as acknowledged by the speakers before me. It is vital for fostering transparency, accountability, and innovation in governance and society. By mandating the release of government data, we empower citizens to scrutinize public policies, detect inefficiencies, and combat double dealing and misconduct, since we can't say that C word, and fostering trust in our institutions. Mr. Speaker, open data drives economic growth. We acknowledge that. And it does so by enabling and supporting researchers with valuable insights to societal advancements. Mr. Speaker, it empowers communities and individuals to make informed decisions and address local challenges. The Honorable PM mentioned improving healthcare and tackling environmental issues. Additionally, we agree, Mr. Speaker, that it enhances public service delivery by enabling an evidence-based policymaking and efficient interagency collaboration. And of course, Mr. Speaker, it aligns with the SDGs. Open data does align with the best practices and supports progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals by increasing transparency, enabling progress tracking. It invites citizens to participate. It is an to build trust, and it ensures alignment with international standards like those of the Open Government Partnership. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, without an Open Data Act, governments risk fragmented data sharing policies, missed economic opportunities, and privacy concerns. And by institutionalizing open data principles, legislation of this nature has the potential to transform data into a resource for innovation, inclusivity, and socioeconomic growth. So let's consider this legal framework, Mr. Speaker. Given all that I've said, we appreciate that getting the legal framework for open data is crucial because it will enable the foundation for an effective, sustainable, and responsible implementation of these open data principles that we're speaking about. A well-crafted legal framework will ensure clarity, it will ensure consistency and accountability in how data is shared, in how it's accessed, how it is used, and it will address potential challenges and maximize benefits. Without a strong legal framework, open data initiatives risk being inconsistent, being vulnerable to misuse, and of course detrimental to privacy and security. For example, Mr. Speaker, ambiguous definitions or weak privacy safeguards could lead to breaches of sensitive information, and that could erode public trust. I know my colleagues on the other side are in the throes of having such trust eroded, given the sensitive information that appears to be coming out of their camp, but I digress. Mr. Speaker, conversely, overly restrictive provisions might stifle innovation and limit the Act's socioeconomic potential, or this legislation that we are envisioning. So, Mr. Speaker, we have to have the right framework, one that balances accessibility with safeguards, and ensuring that the open data drives transparency, that it fosters innovation, and that it empowers our citizens while, of course, we uphold the ethical and legal standards. So, Mr. Speaker, that's the legal framework that's required. Let's talk now about the institutional framework. Having the right institutional framework to support an open data legislative framework is essential for effective implementation and governance. It goes hand in glove. And we know, Mr. Speaker, that our institutions play a very key role in translating the legal framework into actionable policies. So it is our institutions that will ensure compliance and address those challenges that may arise as we practice. Mr. Speaker, so a well-designed institutional framework will provide the organizational structure, it will provide the accountability, it will provide all of the expertise needed to manage data responsibly. So without a strong institutional framework, open data risks becoming fragmented or ineffective, So, for example, the lack of a dedicated oversight body may lead to inconsistent data standards. It may lead to inadequate privacy safeguards, and it could lead to poor enforcement. On the other hand, Mr. Speaker, an effective framework will ensure that there are clear roles and clear responsibilities, enabling collaboration among government agencies, the private sector, and civil society. And it will also foster trust by providing transparency, grievance mechanisms, and of course, regular performance reviews. So, Mr. Speaker, by aligning our institutional capacity with our legal framework, we will be able to unlock the potential of our nation whilst maintaining the accountability and safeguarding our rights. Mr. Speaker, having considered these legal and institutional arrangements and what we would consider to be a bare minimum legal and institutional arrangements that are required to make sure that this step of enacting open data legislation, that we do it successfully, I regret, Mr. Speaker, that this current piece of legislation falls woefully short. And this is why I say that, Mr. Speaker. And I say this knowing and acknowledging, yes, it's the beginning. Yes, I'm sure the speaker after me will tell us that there will be regulations, but we're talking here about the enabling framework for all of this. And so we can't leave very, very important details for the regulations. So let's consider this, Mr. Speaker, because yes, when you talk about data and data sharing, it's not sexy, it's not glamorous work, but it's hard work, and it's work that we have to do if we're going to get it right. You know, I heard the Honorable PM speak about the two pieces of the provisions in here that are intended to serve as deterrents in terms of penalties to the breach of confidentiality and the prohibition on publication of non-public data. Now, Mr. Speaker, these are but two of the elements when you talk about offenses that could occur when you speak about open data. Do we have provisions for the unauthorized modification of or alteration of data, the injection of false data into the system, identity theft and fraud? Do we have provisions for phishing and social engineering? Do we have sufficient legal provisions for cybersecurity breaches? We talk about intellectual property theft. How are we guarding against this? We talk about economic espionage. Are we ready? Are we prepared? I guess the point that I'm making here, Mr. Speaker, is that yes, it's fine to stand up and talk glowingly about what this is intended to achieve, but when you enable a framework such as this, when you enable open data, and you do not have in place a sufficiently robust legal framework, you are literally opening Pandora's box. And so what I want to encourage the members on the other side of the floor is not just to take this as, oh, it's criticism. It is criticism intended to make the product better, because the product has to be improved. So, Mr. Speaker, let's consider what I would want to point out. My colleague, the Honorable Annette Ferguson, pointed out some gaps earlier, so I'll not spend a lot of time on those. But, Mr. Speaker, one cannot help but know that under this bill, the current Commissioner of Information is tasked with a set of responsibilities. Mr. Speaker, we all know the problem that we have currently with accessing information from the Commissioner of Information. Bless his heart, the man is probably in his 80s, Mr. Speaker, and I'm by no means attempting to be ageist, but the fact is that we can't pour new wine into old wineskins. We cannot attempt to do all of these new, creative, innovative things, and at the same time exhibit a reluctance to make the necessary institutional changes that we need to make. And so to lump more responsibilities onto a Commissioner of Information that is already underperforming is problematic. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, when I see this type of approach to legislation, it's annoying. It's annoying because we are almost saying to the people of Guyana, look, y'all just take whatever. And I think we can do better by the people of Guyana, Mr. Speaker, to do something as important as open data requires a robust and a sound legal framework. It requires much more thought than has gone into these 17 sections. Mr. Speaker, when you look at it, the commissioner has several responsibilities, but they're not really, he doesn't have enforcement powers in the context of this Open Data Information Act. And then, of course, there's limited independence because reporting to the minister, of course, has an effect on neutrality, etc. And then there's this issue of public engagement. Mr. Speaker, we cannot talk about open data and not underscore or acknowledge the importance of public engagement in this endeavor. We are breaking new frontier in this regard, and it requires a robust education mechanism, public education mechanism, to take our citizens along. Again, Mr. Speaker, I express my frustration that sometimes it seems as if we come to this parliament to pass laws that are simply intended to tick a box. Mr. Speaker, we have to strengthen the institutional framework to carry this. We have to do it, and we have to establish, Mr. Speaker, I say an independent oversight body, because that will be crucial for ensuring transparency, accountability, and compliance. Accordingly, Mr. Speaker, I propose the establishment of a data commission, replacing the one-person operation that is currently the Commissioner of Information with a multi-member data commission would address the limitations of the current structure and will ensure better oversight, enforcement, and public participation. Mr. Speaker, an independent data commission, and that is the degree to which we could have an independent data commission given what my friend Kemraj refers to as the control freakism that we see from the other side. An independent data commission, Mr. Speaker, one that is free from political or ministerial control, will ensure impartiality in decision making and oversight. Unlike the current setup, Mr. Speaker, where the Commissioner of Information has limited oversight, a data commission could have comprehensive authority to monitor implementation across all public authorities. This independent body could enforce penalties for non-compliances in some regards, address public grievances, and ensure that the principles of the Act are consistently upheld. Mr. Speaker, the key responsibilities of such a commission will include monitoring and compliance with the Act across all public institutions and authorities, auditing data registers and open data plans to ensure adherence to international standards and legal requirements, publishing their annual report, of course, on the state of open data in Guyana, highlighting the successes, the challenges, and noting areas for improvement. Mr. Speaker, that commission could handle complaints and disputes, because make no mistake, when you talk about access, it is inevitable that you will have disputes as it relates to access and the data quality or non-compliance by public authorities, among other things. Investigating breaches of the Act, Mr. Speaker, that commission could investigate breaches in the Act. For example, unauthorized data withholding or publication of restricted data and imposing penalties for the failure to comply. Mr. Speaker, such a commission could, of course, be actively involved in policy development and advocacy, including advising the government on open data policies and practices and promoting public awareness and education about open data and the benefits of transparency. Mr. Speaker, if we're going to do this, capacity building is absolutely required. And so this data commission that I'm proposing would be involved in capacity building, including providing training and technical support to data officers and public authorities to meet the requirements of the legislation. And of course, Mr. Speaker, part of that advocacy would be interacting with civil society and the private sector to encourage collaboration and to encourage innovation. Mr. Speaker, to ensure efficiency and impartiality, the Data Commission should have a chairperson, preferably appointed by the Committee of Appointments of this National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, it should comprise commissioners who will be drawn as representatives from key sectors, including civil society, academia, legal experts, IT professionals, and business, as well, of course, ex officio members, representatives from public authorities, including the Guyana National Bureau of Standards and the National Data Management Authority, the NDMA, who will, of course, be important to provide the technical input. All activities, findings, and recommendations should be documented, of course, in the annual report and made publicly available. The Commission should have its own budget, it should have its own staff, and it should have its own decision-making authority to operate independently as far as is reasonably practicable from the executive branch. What would be the potential impact of this commission, Mr. Speaker? The establishment of a data commission could have significant benefits, including improved transparency and ensuring consistent application of the Act across all public authorities. In other words, no sacred cows. Mr. Speaker, it could serve to increase public trust in government by creating a neutral body to oversee data transparency. It could lead to enhanced accountability. Public authorities could face consequences of failure to comply, and it could incentivize adherence to open data standards. Of course, there's a benefit in terms of greater efficiency in that we could streamline oversight and we could streamline our dispute resolution processes. And this, of course, will reduce delays and reduce inefficiencies in the system. Fostering innovation, Mr. Speaker, is another important benefit, significant benefit of this proposed data commission. Because by ensuring high quality, accessible data, the commission could spur private sector innovation and public participation in governance. And of course, align Guyana with international best practices. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Prime Minister who spoke before me spoke, of course, about the Data Protection Act, the Data Protection Office, and we also know that there's the NDMA. And whilst both the NDMA and the Data Protection Office are integral to Guyana's data governance, they operate independently, and rather with distinct responsibilities. As we know, the NDMA focuses on the broader aspects of data management, e-government services, and cybersecurity, whereas the Data Protection Office is specifically dedicated to the protection of personal data and ensuring adherence to data protection laws. The proposed Data Commission, Mr. Speaker, could serve as the body that coordinates national policy as it relates to data, as it relates to open data, and of course, it will have an interrelated and a symbiotic relationship with these other offices and these other bits of legislation, as have been mentioned by the speakers before me. So, Mr. Speaker, my very strong recommendation is that we send this bill to a select committee, and in that committee, we take seriously this recommendation of a data commission. Yes. We cannot, Mr. Speaker, proceed with such an important initiative on this. And I'll read a quote from He Who Will Not Be Named. It says, it was reported in a news report in DPI on October 23rd, 2024, and it's on AI governance and digitization, and it says, by incorporating AI responsibly, we can empower students to become not just consumers of technology, but achieve ethical participants in its development and use. Let us focus on how we can accelerate digital learning, reduce the digital divide, and make AI a tool of progress rather than a source of fear. He who will not be named. of these lofty speeches, Mr. Speaker, and then we come into the National Assembly with a 17-clause bill that in no way, shape, or form is adequate to support the seriousness of what we are proposing to embark upon. So it's either the government does not understand what it is talking about, or they don't care, or they wish to simply tick a box, Mr. Speaker, and it's problematic. Mr. Speaker, all of these lofty ideals that this government has set is going to be accomplished on the back of open data. This talk, we're talking about AI, etc. We like to talk about digitization. Open data is the cornerstone of that endeavor, Mr. Speaker. And so a robust legal framework is the backbone for successful open data initiatives. And so, Mr. Speaker, I believe that we in this House, with a little more effort, could give to the people of Guyana proper legislation to govern this. If I were a betting woman, I would bet that maybe the order to put this in place will not come into effect until maybe another year from now. And so, Mr. Speaker, the government has to prove to the people of Guyana that they're not just about ticking boxes, but that they're about delivering serious and meaningful change and betterment to the people of Guyana. And we can do it, Mr. Speaker. We could send this bill to a select committee, and we could have the Honorable Attorney General, who will speak after me, take some time from his busy information disseminating schedule to give proper instructions to the Parliamentary Council, so that we could have better legislation, Mr. Speaker. We can do it for the people of Guyana, Mr. Speaker. The people of Guyana deserve it. Thank you, kind sir.